I will say that in the first phase of Marvel, like in the lead up to Infinity War and Endgame, they did a pretty good job laying the groundwork for that ultimate team up movie. I think they
Right.
did a pretty good job like introducing all the characters and making it genuinely exciting when they all came together in the first and second Avengers movie and stuff like that. I remember that. I think they did a good job laying the groundwork for at the time what was a pretty innovative approach to the whole cinematic universe thing. But I
Hmm.
just think after Endgame, like they've totally failed to recreate any sort of similar strategy as far as actually getting people to give a shit about the new Avengers or the new team, anything like that. It's crazy how much they've dropped the ball, in my opinion. And I was actually going to ask you guys about that because I was just watching your video about the Disney CEO and him, kind of admitting that like if you go woke, you go broke. Do you
Hmm.
guys think that that's like actually the reason why Marvel, for example, or Disney as a whole, is kind of suffering right now? Like the whole wokeness stuff infused into media and pop culture, or do you think that's just one element of it? I was just interested in kind
Hmm.
of broaching a bit of a conversation with that
Well,
about.
I mean, I definitely think it's an element of it. I wouldn't say it's like the whole picture. I think I think basically there's like a weird thing that's going on where it seemed like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, maybe there was like a big push to have very writer driven movies and TV shows. And, we had like a lot of good things kind of seem to come out of that. And then now it's like there's like a lot of like studio driven, high up, kind of what you're complaining about, where like, here's a formula, you have to kind of do this thing driven
Right.
project. And then when they have the writer driven project, it's really weird, especially you see this in like Marvel and Disney stuff. It's like it's all like hyper infused with weird woke morality shit. And it's kind of confusing. And so the question is, okay, so like when you watch something like She-Hulk, which I don't know if you ever saw, but it was awful.
Yeah.
When you watch something like
I saw
She-Hulk,
the still photos of how bad it looked, and I was like, I'm never wasting my
right,
time with this, but
right.
go on.
So but like She-Hulk is like hyper woke in terms of the politics of the show. And the question is like, okay, so obviously you putting in like politics people don't agree with, that's going to turn people off. And so does that what we mean when we say that wokeness ruins something? Or do what we mean is, well, is it because the people writing the show, they're not like thinking about it in terms of, okay, this should have a narrative story structure of a,
Mm-hmm.
character journey that kind of follows your, classical hero journey that movies and television, all these things have been kind of based off of forever. And like that should be the first thought. And then kind of like the political things should come in secondly. But instead, because the people doing the stuff are woke, they're kind of working backwards. Either they're working backwards to infuse their political stuff first, or even worse than that, because they believe in sort of a woke worldview about sort of this idea of people or like women especially but people should be kind of born as like perfect avatar characters that don't need to change. They just need to fight against repressive society. If that's kind of the belief structure that you're operating from, I would argue that's going to necessitate that you're going to generally write bad stories. And that seems to
Mm.
be sort of the case that's going on here.
I do agree that people don't like to have, political messaging just shoved down their throat. And I think that because I actually don't think that people care about having political themes in their movies. Like, for example, Barbie was one of the biggest movies of this year, if not the biggest movie. And that movie is about as progressive as you get. It's literally one of the characters starts lecturing at the audience, like towards the end of the film, about
Yeah.
progressivism and the patriarchy and all that
Bro,
stuff.
it
That
was
movie,
even killing me. It was
yeah,
grading me in the
it,
theater, and I had
but
Oh,
like, I'm just saying,
that
like, dude, and that's another one of my hot takes. Like, I'm not afraid of that. Like, I'm wearing a fucking shirt that says "Death to Gender Roles" because my homie made it. But like, I don't. I mean, at this, but it's like nobody. And just to echo Gavin's point, like nobody likes to go to the movie theater to get like a point beat over their head.
Yes.
Like,
let me finish my point though,
I
which
go
is
to
that
church for that. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm not going to the movies for that.
the point though I think is that Barbie didn't lead with that stuff in the advertising. Like if you watch the trailers for it, it's not like you really knew what you were getting into. I think a lot of people, by the time they realized that that's what the movie was, it was too late. They'd already bought their ticket. They were already in the theater. All the colorful kind of Barbie stuff just is what got them into the auditorium in the first place. You also could look at a movie like Avatar. I think it's still the most successful movie of all time. That film has a pretty obvious, like incredibly unsubtle anti-imperialist political message to it.
right.
Like I said, one of the most popular, if not the most popular movie at all time at the box office. But again, if you watch the trailers for that film, look at the promotional material. It's not like they really led with that stuff. It's not like they were trying to shove it down people's throats. Like, aren't you excited to come watch this movie about, imperialism and how bad American militarism is? Like, that's not what they led with. So I do
Mm-hmm.
agree that a lot of the more recent Marvel stuff, like the recent Marvels movie, which was a huge flop. Like you look at the trailer and you're just like, oh, I see where this is going. I'm going to be lectured at. Like, that's going to be the tone of this, and that does turn people off. So I expected to disagree with you a little bit more, but I actually totally agree with you there.
Well, I'm very smart and nuanced. Okay, but no, but I think Avatar is a good example because look at Avatar and Titanic, both by James Cameron, which were some of the most successful movies of all time, and they both have very progressive politics in the movie. When I say progressive, I don't mean like by today's standards. I mean like when they came out standards. Avatar is, as you were saying, it's basically Fern Gully. It's hyper environmentalist. It's very anti-imperialist, pretty anti-capitalist.
Dances with wolves with blue people.
Yeah, right. And then Titanic is all like, oh, look at all these rich people, class struggle stuff, blah, 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 blah. And the reason I think those movies still work, despite the fact that they might have political stuff that people disagree with, is that they still follow a very basic human natural storytelling thing. They're both love stories, okay? They're both about characters who grow and change through their experiences, who basically go to another world and they learn something new and they, decide that they maybe like this new world better than the old world. And that's a very kind of classic storytelling thing. And it seems like, when you look at like She-Hulk, or I haven't seen Marvels, or, something that's else that seems kind of woke, or even Captain Marvel, like that element has been lost for some reason. It's like, if She-Hulk had all these progressive politics stuff in it, but it was about her starting off as like a character who didn't control her anger, didn't control her powers, and through the course of the show, she learns to change and become a better person and control herself, and blah 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 blah. I think it could still work with the politics in it. The problem is that for some reason, it seems like embedded in a lot of these what we call quote woke movies and quote woke stories is an idea that the characters have to not change. They have to start off as like perfect, and it's like they have to just fight against some evil, repressive or oppressive society. And I don't think effective storytelling doesn't seem to work that way.
Yeah, I think it kind of gives and Adam, I don't want to take your if you were gonna jump in.
What?
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. What's up?
I was just going to add, I think that it's kind of a weird thing to look at, because I think if you look at Disney broadly, right, it's got a lot of arms. It has what most people initially think of it as. It's like it's children's films, right? The like animated stuff, the bread and butter that it's had for forever. It also obviously owns the Marvel. It owns, a bunch of different like more mainstream filmmaking arms. And I think that what's happened is that there's like been a weird like pivot in how they make those movies for people. And in a way, it kind of does. Like, Gavin, I don't know what he's getting up for a second, but I think you guys would both agree with me that, like, a movie could have different politics than what you personally feel like, kind of what Sitch was talking about. Like, oh, it doesn't matter, like, if I disagree with this, like, if it's a good movie, if it's a universal story, like, maybe it, like, okay, like, maybe I don't agree with all the politics of, like, Black Hawk Down or whatever, but if it's a good movie, like, I'll fucking watch it, and I'm not having to, like, worry about, like, well, what was the fucking, like, human rights, cost of this, just to, like, give a example of a film. You know what I mean? But
it's been a while since I've seen Black Hawk Down, but I don't remember a lot of politics in it.
Me neither. I don't even think I've seen it since I was 7. Maybe we could say
there was a point when they like hit you over the head with it. I don't know if you've seen the movie Elysium, which is a sci-fi movie. It's
Matt
from the
Damon's
same guy.
In that?
Yeah, it's the same guy that did District 9, which District 9 is really good and tangentially touches on politics, because obviously they're like
District 9 does not tangentially touch on politics. The whole thing is like stemmed in
that guy went on Rogan and talked about it, like, basically ruined his whole film career, right?
Yeah,
it's like
he's back though now. Neil Blomkamp.
I don't know about that.
But yeah, District 9 is pretty political. It's like all about like apartheid.
Yeah, because it's about apartheid and stuff like that. But since it's with aliens, it gives us, lets us stand off a bit. Right. And he even made the aliens kind of look like bugs, which is talk about dehumanizing. But in Elysium, like, the politics is so heavy-handed that I really think it ruins the movie. But in District 9, I think it was handled correctly. So, I mean, I do agree with you that there can be politics in a movie that I disagree with. It just depends upon whether or not it gets preachy. And I think part of it is, some of these movies are just made from like a conservative perspective or a progressive perspective. And sometimes those writers are kind of blind to the opposite tribe's perspective, and they tend to strawman their perspective a bit. And I think that's where they get into trouble, because they're not familiar enough with the arguments on the opposition side that they make them in a compelling way that's believable in a movie. Do
I
you
mean,
get
yeah,
what
it's
I'm
kind of like
saying?
if you take like the Daily Wire's films that come forward, or like some, like say, like some, uber
Lady
progressive,
Ballers.
like ultra
Yeah,
woke
Lady
film,
Ballers.
right? Where it's just like clear. Or I remember back, what was the God's Not Dead movie that was out when Gavin and I worked
Yes,
at the
with
movie
Kevin
theater when we were
Sorbo.
in high school, and it was
Well,
like
look,
God's
that's a
not dead,
perfect example.
and it's just
See,
like, okay,
it goes both ways. Yeah, the
yeah.
Christians are kind of blind to the sensibility of normal people.
And I think that that's what happens, right? When it's not actually art that's coming from like an earnest place of like a need for self-expression. Like maybe I, watch a movie and it's about a guy that, he finds his faith in God and it's really powerful and he builds a community and like his church has becomes this big, thing and they make a stand for what they believe in or whatever, right? And I'm like, I'm not a religious guy, but I would fucking get down with that movie, right? But if it's actually just like some like weird ass pastor that's like going around and you're like making a movie like what was
Father
that? Father
Stew.
Stew with
Yeah,
Mark Wahlberg.
Mark
It's like, well,
Wahlberg.
that's not actually gonna make me connect with it because it's just a clear like puff piece for whoever this guy was that Mark Wahlberg wants to valorize with his like, low budget production company. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean by the word earnest, because do you mean like believable? Because I do think the believability is what interferes with it, but a lot of the
I think
cringe
that
Christian movies, I think, do come from an earnest place. Like, I think
Well,
I do
just mean,
believe
like,
these things.
you're setting out not to tell a story, but you're setting out to make a point, I guess, is
Yes.
more of what I meant.
Propaganda versus
Okay.
yeah,
Like,
got
you
it.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like let's talk about like Russian film, for example. Take all the fucking like stakes out of it, right? That was all propaganda, right? Some of it was like really awesome though. And I just think that the worst of it was when it was like the most shallow, blatant, like for the state propaganda, right? That was going on in the USSR. And then the best of it is like operating within the realms of propaganda. It can't challenge the state at all, but it can make an entirely different and unique point that actually is sustainable. And that's how you get, the more lasting films of that generation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the two issues are, one, what you're saying, Adam, the how shoehorned, how in your face the politics can seem, can instantly turn you off. And the second thing is what you're talking about, which I guess in a more like cynical way I would describe as that, art is subjective to an extent, but it's also objective to an extent. There are objective ways in which people are used to hearing stories, and that changes over time, obviously, and is culturally different. But like if we're just talking about in America, or into a Western audience, there are sort of objective ways in which people have to structure stories for people to emotionally connect with them. Because like really, whether a story is good or not all depends on whether it connects with you on an emotional level or not. And there are certain tactics and techniques and ways of structuring a story to make it connect, or attempt to make it connect with you on an emotional level. And it seems like a lot of the people who are kind of trying to push a message, whether it's a Christian message or a conservative message or a woke message, they're not thinking of storytelling that way. They're thinking of the messaging first, as opposed to I need to make a story first and then make the messaging work around the story.
That's a great way to look at it, Sitch, because they look at it more like they're going to educate you. They're not going to give you this experience and appeal to you emotionally.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It is really interesting to see the state of Disney in the post-pandemic era and kind of break down everything that's gone wrong, because obviously a lot of the issues that Disney's dealing with you can kind of apply to the whole movie industry in the post-pandemic era, but I think Disney really specifically kind of personifies a lot of the issues, and they just cannot seem to get a W. Like I said, I was watching your guys' video earlier, and it's just crazy to see how like pretty much every big budget movie they've released this year has been a flop. Even the ones that aren't really woke or have anything to do with politics, like the new Indiana Jones film, for example. I saw that movie. I don't really think it had much wokeness in it or much political subtext at all, but it also just wasn't that great. And it was mind blowing to me that they spent, I think, like almost $300 million on it or something wild. So yeah, it's pretty crazy to see.
Get Harrison Ford to show up to the set, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then I also tuned in earlier when you guys were talking about the new Godzilla movie, which I think you said you didn't have a chance to see yet, Adam, but that film was like $15 million, and it's already obviously made its budget back like times 10. But it's like, what the hell is Hollywood doing, racking up these budgets? And then it's like money laundering or something.
People have basically rejected that too. If you look at the most successful films of the year, you mentioned the Godzilla movie and how they made that for about 15 million. But what was the movie that
really?
I never make it
I
out?
didn't know it was so cheap. It looks great. I mean,
it looks amazing, but yeah, it was $15 million. Isn't that fucking crazy.
Is there a bunch of nobodies in it? Because that's probably a huge budget.
That probably is why I don't think a lot of the Japanese actors are, probably anywhere near as big name as the people that show up in like Hollywood
Godzilla's
productions.
The star anyway. Who cares?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. No one's turning out to like Godzilla movies to see whoever, Millie Bobby Brown or whoever.